Thank you all. So we can dive in and start to get rolling here. So I am Matthew Volm, CEO and co-founder of RevOps Co-op. We've got a global community of, I think, 15,000 plus RevOps folks from all across the globe. I will throw in a link to the community if you're not a member already. We do have a free membership option, so free to join. And along with me, I've got a few smarter people who are going to be dropping some knowledge on y'all today. So I've got Clayton Ramnarine, who is the co-founder of Una Software, and Rosalyn Santa Elena, who is the founder at the RevOps Collective. And now, before I turn it over to you all to dive into the topic and the subject matter, I told you one that I was going to ask you a non-RevOps, a non-work related
Oh
question,
no.
and then two.
Great.
I
Love
also
those.
want to I also want to just let everybody in the audience know I did not tell them what I was going to ask
Oh.
beforehand. So you are getting the unfiltered off the cuff answer. All right. So Clayton, I'm actually going to go to you first. So Rosalind, you'll at least
All
have a
right.
little bit of
Hit me.
time here. All right. As you can probably tell by my background, we're hosting RevOps AF in New Orleans next year in May. We're going to have 300 plus RevOps folks there. I'll throw the link in the chat to this in case folks want to take a look at some of the speakers, the agenda, and actually we've got tickets for sale already. So my question for you, Clayton, is imagine that you're a speaker on the main stage at RevOps AF. You got 300 plus people in the audience, and we call your name to come up on stage. Everybody's clapping, they're cheering, they're super pumped for your talk. What would your walk-on song be? Like, what music would you want played to kind of jazz up
Ooh.
the crowd that would be very Clayton-esque, if you will?
This brings me back to kind of high school when I was I think trying to be like not class president but treasurer because I'm like a finance guy. And I walked on stage to present why I should be treasurer and it was to the Fugees.
Nice. I
So
like
it'd
it.
definitely be a Fuji song.
Yeah. All
Throwback.
right, I like it. Yeah. Hey, I support that. I'm still listening to all the emo bands that were popular in like the early 2000s, so I
Yeah.
support the throwbacks. Rosalind, same question for you. You're walking on the main stage at RevOps AF. You can play any song, any band as your walk-on music. What would it be?
Yeah. So I have two songs, one that I always play, and for some reason I cannot remember the title. I was actually pulling up my Spotify. I'm cheating to try to remember because for anybody who's attending that has attended any of like my RevOps courses, I always play this one song. And for some reason it slipped my mind.
Yeah.
But the other song that I'm big on, especially for RevOps, is the Unstoppable by Sia.
Nice.
Mm.
I always think
Nice.
about us as unstoppable. So you've got to have a walk-on song. You
Yeah.
have to,
Got to have a
right?
walk-on song. I
Love
love
that.
that. I love that it connects to the unstoppableness of RevOps, if you will. And
That's
also I
right.
think the unstoppableness of revenue operators to tackle some of those big kind of go-to-market problems and challenges, right? Which is what we're here to talk about today. So with that very smooth segue, Clayton, I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend, to start walking us through some of the content and the topics for today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Rosalind, for joining me. This is awesome. I haven't done many of these before, but it's not with an audience. It's usually just with operators trying to figure out how do we do things better. And I figured when talking to Rosalind, what would be some good things to talk about just around where go-to-market is going and how we've evolved over the last few years. And so maybe just a quick throwback on context on where have we come from, where are we going, and then what are some tactical things that we can do to hopefully get us in a much better position going forward. And then some key takeaways. So we'll sum it up and then we'll drop it in for Q&A. So many of you have seen this before. We've all talked about this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but basically the golden era of SaaS where everything was moving to the right. We had a good 10-year run, right? Where acquisition equal growth equal high valuations. But this created this weird mindset. Hey, we just got to keep growing. We got to keep growing. We got to keep acquiring new customers. And the only way to do that is double inputs, double outputs, very short-term focused. Then, of course, when the interest rates increased, everything was expensive and companies realized they had to get more efficient, right? And then when that happened, when companies started to look under the hood, they were clearly not driving the most healthiest unit economics. They were suddenly exposed, which led to the SaaS crash. And so we had these different phases of approaches over time, right? And so where are we headed right now? We're still seeing half the growth at twice the cost of the past. So this is an issue. We're still trying to figure out how to address the new reality. We're still trying to balance demand for growth, but also profitability. So how do we do this thing in an efficient and sustainable way? We're still trying to figure out how do we set companies up for success long term. Thinking about that, so what are some of the things in our go-to-market motions that we can address today that will allow us to perform better? And so I think first, it just really requires a shift in mindset. And then two, we have to figure out, we have to do more with less, and we have to be really data-driven in the process. We have to consider growth alongside cost as well as customer happiness. So it's far more complex and sophisticated way of thinking about things. So when we think about growth, we have to move away from just acquisition. We have to start thinking about growth comes from not just sales, but retention and expansion. And the maturity of your business will dictate what the mix is, what the focus is. If you're an early stage company, you're likely focusing more on acquisition. A later stage company, you're focusing on how do I engage the base, create more products, become more efficient and sustainable. And so that kind of leads into the first kind of mistake that we see, or that we want to correct for, is using antiquated models for the kind of this new environment. So Rosalyn, when you look at this diagram, like what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think as soon as I see this, this is, as you said, outdated, right? This is the classic sales funnel, but in SaaS, there's a whole nother journey, right? Beyond this. I always tell folks that when the customer signs the paper, that's just hopefully the beginning of the journey.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this. When I look at this as having been a sales leader, it's short-term focus. It's like hunter mentality. We're just chasing deals. We just want to get the sale. But if you've been in go-to-market over the last 3 or 4 years as well, you know that these short-term focuses can mask like underlying risks affecting long-term revenue, predictability and profitability and all those things. I remembered, when I was thinking about this question, it brought me back to when I was a global VP of sales at a company called Benna. It's like an FP&A solution. I was tasked, okay, we're really good on acquisition. Let's go back to the base and let's figure out where we can actually get more dollars. We didn't have an expansion team. We didn't have an account management team. So I went to my CS team and I was like, give me our 10 best customers. I'm going to go on the road. I'm going to book meetings. I'm going to have conversations with them. I want to understand how they're using the product and where opportunities for more use can happen. Like maybe they're not taking advantage of different features or functions, or there's more opportunity to engage people across the company to use the platform. Long story short, I came back with a list of possible churn prospects. 9 out of the 10 are likely going to churn in the next 2 quarters. And it was because we had this kind of sleeper mentality. It was like, okay, it's transactionally focused. We sold the deal. We expect them to get onboarded. And once they're onboarded, then they're activated. They should automatically renew. They're happy. We've given them a survey. They told us 9 out of 10 on our onboarding. This is amazing. But it gave us this false positive of a perceived happy customer. There was no leading indicators that we had at that point in time of our journey where we had customer engagement or customer health as a leading indicator, or product usage as a leading indicator. And CFOs really dig this, by the way. If you keep surprising them with forecasts where you weren't ready for a churn or renewals, they love that. What have you seen?
Yeah, same thing. I think that we talk about customer success and partnering with our customers and driving ROI, and we talk a lot about that, but I think a lot of companies still are very top of funnel focused, right? We talk customer sat and customer success, but then in practice, we're trying to fill the funnel. Right? We're always talking about pipeline. And I think that there's a huge miss for organizations when they're not digging into their customer base and really understanding, not just it's the gold, right? I've said this before. It's like that customer data is gold because it's not only information that you can leverage to make your marketing engine better and make your sales process better and your product better, but also there's a big space, white space, in terms of trying to expand within your existing customer base, because we all know it's harder to acquire a net new customer and be able to actually see that payback within whatever your time frame is. So I think that too many companies focus on top of funnel only. And it's like this chart actually reminds me of the leaky bucket, right? Think about the leaky bucket where we're just pouring leads, pouring leads into the top of the funnel. We're converting them potentially and we're winning them, but then we're losing them on the back end.
Exactly. The other thing when I look at this model, what rings true to me is your typical people-oriented system. It's because this has been used as this is the growth driver. You've got to think about this. And if you want to grow your prospects or leads or opportunities, then you likely need more people. You need to recruit, onboard, train. It's really subjective. It's really slow to adapt to market changes, right? That's your path to growing. It's through people. To adding more heads, it's more expensive. It takes time. It takes 6 to 12 months to like onboard somebody fully to take advantage of some market opportunity that you saw. And so, yeah, that's the other thing that kind of pops out to me.
Yeah, which I think we've seen in the market.
Exactly. And what is the shift happening right now? There's a lot of, I don't know how many out there have taken the revenue architecture course or heard about winning by design, but we're definitely moving towards the shift to an integrated customer-centric go-to-market model that focuses on delivering, as winning by design calls it, impact, but really it's just, hey, you signed a piece of paper, as you said, Rosalyn, that's just a commit that we need to deliver a certain value by a certain period of time to get their recurring revenue. And so what is that? How do we measure that? What is the value at each stage of the customer journey? And this to me looks more like a closed loop system. And it's built for instant feedback. And so it's the bow tie model, the data model here really measures or is supposed to measure all the different steps across the customer journey. If you implement the data model, it means that you're trying to collect all the information across the customer journey in a single integrated view. And you're hoping to connect the dots on what's working, what's not really quickly. And obviously, if you're looking at this is an integrated view of go-to-market, the big thing here is that a lot of the issues that you'll come across are interrelated across the different parts of GTM. So this model I really like because it's driving towards long-term relationship focus rather than transactional. CFOs love this approach because it improves long-term revenue stability, right? It reduces the reliance on acquiring customers to reach their projections. It improves margins, right? Because like you said earlier, retaining and growing customers is typically more cost-effective than getting new ones.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I know the poll just went up to see how many of the participants today are using the bow tie model. But I also think about it as a flywheel, right? It's this, I think about a continuous cycle around your customer life cycle end to end as well.
Here's
exactly.
a question for, I guess, Rosalyn and Clayton, because I think we obviously live and breathe this stuff, right, every day. So before I end the poll and actually share the results, I guess I'm just curious, what's your quick thought? We've got a little more than like around 25 people that have responded. Just quick guess on how many said yes, they are using that today, just percentage.
Oh my goodness.
Ooh.
Do we have we should have asked a poll on who do we have on the call today, like their role, right? I think if they were marketing or sales, maybe not, but I think more of an operator. Assuming we have more operators on the show, I'm going to say, I don't know, Clayton, I'm going to say 65%. I'm just throwing out a number.
Nice. But Jocko, actually, if you're at the Go-to-Market 2024 Summit in Austin, Jocko asked the same question, like how many in the audience are taking the revenue architecture course? And it looked like about 25%. So I'm gonna go 30%.
Okay. All right. If we met in the middle with both of your answers, we would be about correct. So yeah, about 45% that said yes, they're using the bow tie model today.
Very cool. It's interesting for those that are not familiar with it or are not using it. The reason we like it is because it really measures the full customer journey. It's just another way in which you can improve efficiency across our go-to-market motions. Instead of just doubling inputs to double outputs, the model really focuses on improving execution. So when I look at this, I think about, okay, it's about being intentional about continuous improvement. Stuff doesn't just improve on their own. So if you really get step one, define your pipelines. So you have 4 different pipelines, what it's showing here: acquisition, onboarding, retention, expansion. If you can define them and all the moments that matter within them, so there's a clear process and a clear methodology, then you understand what you need to measure. In this model, from an operational lens, it's really about the 4 horsemen is what we call them at Una, which is volume and amount, conversions and time and stage. If you monitor and measure the performance across your different go-to-market motions, The goal is to try to make incremental improvements, because by making incremental improvements across execution, across the bow tie model, then they compound. So instead of adding more at the top to get more output, improving your execution across the bow tie is going to actually can drive a significant amount of growth without increasing any cost.
Yeah, and I think that's where RevOps really comes in, is making those operational improvements. I like what you said, Clayton. I think we talked about this too in our past conversations, just around the fact that a lot of companies focus on top of funnel, like how many, quantity of leads. Then they look at basically MQL to SQL, and then they go look at close rates, right? So there's a whole lot that happens in between that, where there's a lot of opportunity, as you said, for incremental improvements, right? Imagine if you could just get 1 or 2%, right, at every stage across the funnel, improve everything just a slight bit. And like you said, compounds over time, right? And you're going to be able to significantly improve win rates overall.
Yes, I love that, because if you're focused on the things that you're doing every day, it really is about continuous improvement, and the conversation and the things that you do, you should be able to measure their impact as well through this model. But it's not the only thing that matters. So I think when you use the bow tie model, if you're moving towards that direction, integrated go-to-market view or health of your go-to-market motions, is okay, we can measure the operational components, like how are things measuring up versus benchmark or a plan or forecast in terms of movement. But I don't think I think you're missing a key component, which I think is the financial stuff. I think you need to marry up the costs, because ultimately what we're trying to say is, in this new environment, you can't just spend your way to your targets. You need to steer the business effectively. You need to understand the financial implications of what you're doing. So you need to ask the question, what are the returns we're getting for the dollars we're putting into marketing or sales activities or into CS? You need to ask those questions in this model. If you marry up the financial components to the operational, you should be able to see the unit economics behind this stuff. Why you should care immensely about this is because quality revenue, it's all about quality revenue. So investors obviously reward firms that can deliver consistent profitable growth with high valuations. I think if you're growing at 40% and you're doing it with sound economics, and you're looking at a 10 to 18 multiple versus a 3 to 6, there's a lot of reasons why you should invest the time in marrying up your operational data with your financial data. I'm sure you've worked with different customers who are thinking about this. How have they gone about instrumenting the data model or the bow tie?
Yeah, I think the instrumentation of implementing something similar to a bow tie, right? And maybe that's where some of the folks are split, that maybe they're not leveraging exactly the bow tie, but they probably have some type of customer journey that they're following. I think it's really important that I would say that I think most companies, if not all, have some semblance of a customer journey, right? How detailed it is or how well it's mapped out. I think that's the level of maturity that you'll see in different organizations. But again, I still think that there's a lot of focus on the front end and just not enough focus on the back end. One of the things that you mentioned here, the financial data, that I just want to touch on is, I think from a RevOps perspective, we talk about CAC quite a bit, right? Or we talk about marketing spend, but there's a lot of things in between there that you're pointing out that are more difficult, I think, to measure in today's environment. So I think sometimes people will pass up on measuring those pieces because it's difficult with the data or the tools and the solutions that we have available.
Yeah. I know at PartnerStack, when I tried to, this was my last company where kind of ran revenue and sales, we tried to implement something like this using kind of BI tools. It's the question I get asked the most. Okay, you have this theory, this framework, how do you implement it? Some people are trying to do it in Excel. Some people are using BI solutions. How do you do it effectively? And it's tough because it's not simple. When you're looking at the left side, you're looking at likely CRM data. When you're looking at the right side, it's customer data. How do you connect the two? And then, of course, your financial data that comes in, you have to figure out there's an allocation methodology that you have to apply to marry everything up. So it's not as simple as it looks. So I guess for just a quick recap, I don't think you're going to grow efficiently unless you consistently track how your leads and ops and customers are performing through every step of the customer journey. I think that's clear. I think you need to align metrics to the customer journey using some form of data model like the bow tie. I think you need to start with real-time go-to-market data to help with the day-to-day decision making. And I think you need to layer in the financial metrics to ensure the sustainability of kind of your business decisions, like the things that you're going to invest in. You need to be able to measure that as well. Would you add anything else?
I think this chart or this visual tells the complexity. It easily illustrates the complexity that we were just talking about. Why folks know they need to do it, but it's difficult.
No, I don't think the implementing the data model without getting teams aligned to thinking about go-to-market as a cross-functional endeavor works. So sometimes I find that you hire really smart people, data scientists, RevOps people. To me, they're strategic players that sit alongside the CRO. They're the ones that can bring this information and bring the connective tissue to really important conversations. But if it, from the top, like the CEO level, doesn't really believe and it hasn't really articulated that, hey, we need to move away from these random acts of sales and marketing CS. We need to apply revenue architecture because it allows us to be intentional. I think it creates a massive barrier for growth. What I've seen is it prevents teams from aligning around customer needs completely. Like when you're sitting in these silos, it leads to misaligned goals and misaligned decision making where people are incented differently. The whole system breaks down. For example, if we're driving the wrong leads, we're converting the wrong ICP customers, we're not equipped with the right CS motions to activate customers, it just hurts the customer experience and ultimately your revenue aspirations.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're preaching to the choir for sure, to the RevOps team about this alignment. I think the classic example that I always share with folks is, and everybody hits home, is just how many times have you walked into, right, a pipeline meeting? Marketing shows up, sales shows up, and then we want to talk about pipeline. And the first thing that happens is the numbers don't match. Marketing says, oh, the pipeline is X, and sales says it's Y, because they're looking at the data differently. And then you spend the entire hour, a very expensive meeting, discussing, just trying to reconcile the number versus leveraging the time to actually talk about strategy and how we're going to improve that number and convert that number. So I think, that single view of the business and having everybody aligned across the revenue team is so important.
That's a great question. What do you think comes first? Do you think it's and who owns it? Like, how do you get people to think outside of their domains?
Yeah.
Is it incentive based? Is it behavior based? Does it have to come top down? What's been your experience?
I think it's a combination of all of the above, but I definitely think that that's where revenue operations really plays, right? Our role is really that hub, that body or that function that can step back and take a look from a customer lens in terms of what that experience and engagement looks like, and be able to bring together all of the different teams and really align them on, I think, strategy first, right? It's really those goals, the objectives that we're trying to hit, right? And then the strategy to get there, and then the operational piece on how we get there. But if we can align on at least what our goals are, and then have everybody start looking at the data the same way and have them see that holistic data set versus just their piece, right? Because as you mentioned, they're oftentimes marketing's just looking at their piece, and then they don't really know what happens down funnel. And then same thing with sales, right? They look at their piece. And so tying all of that together is really RevOps' superpower. And I'm going to go on my evangelism right now for RevOps, but really it is, whether it's RevOps or someone else, but someone needs to be looking at the entire business across the funnel from a customer lens.
Yes. Also, it's interesting. What do you think about this idea when going back to our first slide where we talked about kind of the traditional sales and marketing funnel? When I look at that also, I forgot to mention, was it feels sales equals growth in that equation. Oftentimes, if we win, if we're growing, sales is doing a great job. For losing, sales is fault. But ultimately, I think if you're in a high growth SaaS company, I think everybody's job is to generate revenue or growth and value to some degree. Like, you're either directly involved in revenue generation, and I equate that to value creation for a customer.
Yeah.
You're either supporting someone doing it or you're protecting it. And I think every role in the company, like, sometimes that's just not clear.
One of my favorite chief customer officers had said that to me a long time ago, had said that everybody in the customer is in customer success. I'm sorry, everybody in the company is in customer success. And so
Yeah.
we're all here to make the customer successful, which leads to driving more revenue and leads to all of these different things. I think the common analogy that I like to use with the silos is just with SaaS, it's no longer that traditional sort of baton race, right? Where marketing is handing it off to sales and sales is handing it off to post sales and beyond. Instead, it's like a soccer game. I use that analogy a lot, that it's more of a soccer game where everybody stays involved in the game, but they come in and out at different points in the game.
I like that. Yeah, because the alternative is, and what I've experienced in the past is you can get into the game, but you might only just play your position, so to speak, and not worry about what else is happening. And I find that's very true in like uncoordinated or unorchestrated go-to-market teams. It's okay. Yeah, I'm just responsible for top funnel. I got my MQLs. That's how I'm compensated. That's what I need to deliver. I'm doing my job. Oh, this churn on the back end of this. Do I care? I do care, but it's also not my problem to fix, kind of thing. When I think in this model, it really is everybody's problem to fix.
Yep.
And it usually is interrelated. Yeah, I do think, I like that analogy a lot. I think it's great segue into the next one. I think number 4 is just really around, let's say you've got an aligned team, you've got a cross-functional go-to-market team, you've built the alignment, you guys are moving forward, got a data model, you can now see what's happening, you're able to surface data. But I think that's just where it begins. Surfacing the data is, yes, it's hard. It's hard to bring an integrated view of go-to-market and customer health. I think that's a big step, but I think how do you apply the collective cognitive power to the insight to determine what the next best action is, and then determine and agreed upon actions, and then drive through the execution. And I find the idea of talking about it in your go-to-market meeting is great, but then what should happen next? How are you seeing that?
Yeah, that's I've been on my soapbox, I think probably the last year and a half or so about this next best action, right? Because it's great that we have data. Like you said, it's great to have insights, but it's all about what are we going to do with that information? And then how do we put it into play? Right? How do we put it into practice? It's not enough to say, oh, we need to pivot here, or we need to do more of this or that. We need to be able to have a workflow to, actually put it into practice and start to measure and start to use that information. But I see a lot of companies and teams get stuck on the data side, right? They just want to wait until their data is perfect before they want to report, versus taking your data the best you have it. It's iterative. It'll get better over time, but you have to start measuring. And that's the way that you can actually push to cleanse the data and get the data in the right place. But yeah, I think a lot of times I identify, at least for this mistake, is really identify a problem, but not have an action plan to go deliver.
Exactly. I think, I've seen that many times too. So I think everybody's well-intentioned. Like they figured it out. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to release this product. We're going to launch this new motion, or we're going to do this campaign, whatever it is. But then something falls by the wayside because there's not just one problem to fix or one thing to focus on. Everybody's got their thing that they need to focus on, and then we're going to layer on this new thing that we have to go in and execute on. So how do you create a system where the momentum continues after the meeting? Like, what is a really good cadence that folks can take away here and go, okay, I need to shift the way that we have that meeting, and I need to shift the way in terms of the follow-ons to make sure it happens?
Yeah, I think a lot of that work is, as you said, a lot of times things go by the wayside because more priorities come up, right? More fire drills come up. But I think having that very clear plan on who's, having next steps and actions, but having those assigned and holding people accountable, which I think is also a big part of our role, is really making sure that those things get done and holding people accountable to a timeline.
Yeah. One of the things I'll probably also add, even as a precursor to that, is I would change the orientation of the meeting. Like, I find a lot of those meetings I think marketing does the best job because they're so good at doing slideware, but they do great slides, giving us all the different events that are happening that are driving more website visits, driving more people to top of funnel, all that kind of stuff. But I think alt and sales will tell you everything about the pipeline, the top 10 customers they hope to land. It's same with CS, like, you're the ones that are going to renew, and here's our big expansion opportunities. I think that's all great, but I think that belongs pre-meeting. That's pre-meeting work. I think that you should be able to access in a system, and then you're already coming to the meeting informed. So the meeting should really focus on, hey, what are the things that we are seeing friction across the customer journey? Where are we seeing that friction? let's highlight the 2 or 3 biggest areas that we can talk about that we feel would unblock revenue, close a leak, or an idea that we think might increase our potential to capture more revenue. I think the conversation in that meeting needs to change as well.
Yeah, 100%. And this goes back to that operating cadence, right? That we launch around, what meetings we need to have. But around those meetings, every meeting needs to have an owner. You need to know who are the participants and what their actions are and what the responsibilities are, like a RACI, basically.
Yeah.
Within every meeting, it's okay, what are we trying to achieve here? What's our desired outcome? And then when you have the discussion, use them, like you said, send a lot of that information ahead of time, right? Because people may not have a chance to look at it, right? Everybody's busy. Maybe they're back to back and they're not going to have a chance to look. But even if they spend 5 minutes or even 2 minutes before the call, just quickly reviewing to get up to speed so that they can actually add value and have a recommendation or a perspective when they join the meeting. And then you'll have a much more productive discussion versus spending half the time just setting context. Then you have that discussion and then you can say, okay, what are next steps? Right. And making sure that you always follow up after those meetings in terms of what's decisions made, right? What are the next steps? Who's taking those actions and those target dates that need to happen. And then that way you're having this regular cadence of meetings, because a lot of companies, one of the companies that I've worked with before, we have a ton of meetings, right? But when you show up for the meeting, you have 15 people invited, like every sales leader, every marketing leader is invited, but people come to the meeting and not really know what the meeting is about or it's just not a good use of time. And then it gets easily derailed. You start talking about other things and then people stop showing up if they don't think they need to be there. And that happens, and it's a slippery slope because it will happen very quickly. So having very defined, this is a less is more situation, right? Have the right meetings with the right people with a very clear agenda and very clear outcomes. So maybe that's a good takeaway for anybody today who's listening is go and look at your operating cadence, look at all those meetings. Are there redundancies? Are there missing? Right? Are there discussions that should be happening regularly that aren't? And maybe give your operating cadence a refresh.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things we tried to do at Partner Staff, I think it worked really well, is, and if you don't have a chief of staff, that's okay, because it's like a very chief of staff thing to do, but the agenda wasn't created until everybody reviewed the looms of whatever the retro or the thing that we were going to cover in the meeting. And then once everybody had a chance to review it, and there was looms from the different folks across go-to-market based on what they wanted to cover, what we're showing, once everybody had a chance, and everybody got to drop in 2 or 3 agenda items that they thought would be useful to discuss. And so then we crafted the agenda post everybody kind of reviewing. So if you didn't post anything that's clear, you didn't have time to review it. And that's okay. That would happen sometimes, but it just made the meetings far more effective and focused.
I have a question for both of you. So you don't know what you don't know, though. And we all have obviously limited experience in terms of like our professional background and things like that. So what I've seen in the past is, right, people might say, oh, if I only had the data, or the insights around X, I'd be able to solve this problem. But they don't actually go to the next step and then say, what would you do? What actions would you actually take if you had that information today? So when that information ultimately gets produced, they are at a standstill, right? They're like, oh, okay, wow, this is great, super interesting. And they're like, what do I do with it? So when you all have been in those situations before, where again, you don't know what you don't know, any frameworks or best practices in terms of how people can approach those scenarios of, okay, I've never had this data before, haven't had these insights before, don't have maybe prior experience to lean on. How can you go out and maybe figure out what you should actually test or execute or take action on?
Yeah. Clayton, I don't know if you want to go first, but
you go, Bob.
Just a few thoughts. I think when you see the data and you think about the story that the data is telling you, right? Assuming now you have the data, you have the insights. So what is the data telling you? What is actually working well and what doesn't seem to be moving the needle, right? And if you look at some of those things, those are the things that you can test and start to lean in on, right? Do more of some of those things. A simple example is if you're seeing, hey, we're seeing some traction in this industry. I don't know, I'm just making things up. But if you start to see a certain type of traction in your revenue numbers around this industry in this region, and you start to say, okay, that looks like it's directionally sound, let's lean in and do more of that. Let's invest more there, or let's start to target this type of customer in that region and see if we have that traction. Because I think when you have the time to look at the insights and really ask yourself and be curious about why some of these things are happening this way, then you can start to have some hypothesis, right? And start to test those things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what I was going to say too. Is strategy is nothing more than you have a thesis. There's probably some underpinning of data that's supporting that thesis. A thesis then drives out a set of actions that you're going to apply, and then you're going to monitor it, and you're going to outline what the risks are, and then you see it through. And if it works, great. If it didn't, why not? And you keep asking the questions, and it will drive you into the next point. That's why I love the idea of like continuous revenue improvement, because that should be it. You're constantly surfacing the data around your customer journey, and it's telling you things that are interrelated. You're using that to inform decision making and actions, and it's iterative. So then you're trying to figure it out, but it gives you a much better way to go about it than this random act of sales, marketing, and CS.
Yeah, or just the gut, right? It's always the gut or feel. And part of it's going to be art and science, because you are testing and it is iterative. So you're going to have some data. It's not going to potentially be complete, but that coupled with that gut, right? The feeling, what the sentiment, what you're seeing in the market is going to give you an action. And then you need to iterate, right? Continue to test.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, big takeaway from that is, right, it's not about necessarily being right or wrong, but learning what works and doesn't work, right? And just making sure that 100% of the time you learn whether or not those things actually work or don't work. Not that I'd love to be right 100% of the time on any decisions I make, but that's not going to happen. So don't focus on that. Focus on learning so that you can do more of the things that do actually work. Makes sense.
Yeah. Progress over perfection, right? Yeah. I think the final thing is, one of the things that we see is, we've been talking a lot about silos, is just like forecasts that are developed in silos. It really throws everybody off. Finance teams especially hate surprises. Having worked with finance people for 15 years, missing your forecast sends finance teams into a tailspin every month as they try to reforecast spend around future hires, investments, projects, tech, and try to manage cash flow. They're like a recipe for silos are a recipe for missed targets for sure, and inaccurate projections, budgeting. So it's not just about predicting new sales either. It's about understanding renewal rates, upsell potential, and all the factors that influence those outcomes, which should be measured through this kind of path. And so you really need this kind of integrated view of a forecast. Like, how have you seen that, Rosalyn? Like, we've done it a couple different ways, and we're embarking on a way to do it in our app that I think is a little bit different than your typical CRM forecast or your bottoms up forecast, or your engagement forecast from Gong, or what other tools you're using.
Yeah, forecasting is near and dear to my heart. Like comp for some reason. Compensation, sales comp, and forecasting are the two that I think are really interesting, because every company does it and every company struggles with it, right? It can always be better, but they're so incredibly key to your go-to-market. One of the things that you said about the different silos, because I think this is very common, where you see, going back to the pipeline comment about marketing and sales, just how we're looking at our forecast can be so different across not just the teams, but even within the teams, right? I think we've all had experience where just within your sales team, sales reps and sales leaders are forecasting differently. What is commit versus what is upside, right? If anything, I think just getting back to basics and making sure that you have really clear definitions around your forecast, right? Forecast categories, sales stages, marketing stages, right? Lead stages, just understanding that is probably, it sounds really basic and it sounds like, oh, everybody does that. But if you really were to go poll 10 different companies and ask their sales teams, probably 8 or 9, I would bet, you're going to get different answers, right? From the sales reps within the same teams on what means what. And so I think getting back to basics and just having those clear definitions across the funnel, across that customer journey, is going to pay off in spades, just having that piece. And then that rigor around keeping people accountable and making sure that people are following those things.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think, people look at this model. When I look at this, I see at least 4 different pipelines. And then if you're operating in silos, that means 4 completely likely different methodologies that people are are
Yeah.
applying. And therefore, when they forecast, you're going to get all sorts of differing results based on the way people are thinking about it. So you need some alignment on, okay, understanding what your process is, how things move through your particular pipeline. Like you said, you need a defined sales process and a common methodology. What is, like you said, what is commit? What is best case? What is not likely? So we can all get a realistic view. And I also think like forecasting should be like a collaborative process.
No, I definitely think it's a collaborative process, but being really clear on roles and responsibilities, right? Who needs to forecast what? When you think about expansion and retention, that's a area that I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to forecasting, depending on your sales or your revenue model in terms of who owns retention and who owns expansion. A lot of times there could be an AE involved, there could be an AM, like an account manager, there could be the CSM involved in some of these things, or even a separate renewals team. So being really clear on roles and responsibilities of who is responsible for forecasting what, and making sure that what part is really well defined.
Yes. The other thing I would probably throw in too is if you are measuring the entire customer journey and you have enough data, I think you need a significant amount of data, maybe where you think your processes were really sound, probably 18 months to 2 years. You have a lot of the historical performance or the elements of it to be able to forecast based on previous historical, like the operational metrics. I'm curious to see what is going to be a more accurate forecast, whether it's a director sales forecast, your gong forecast, your Clary forecast, or something that actually looks at prior history. It's going to be interesting. I think that's, to me, I think that's the path because it takes the subjectiveness out of it. And I think you can apply to your existing pipeline, your historical conversion rates, time and stage, average deal size across your go-to-market motions, but you can also build synthetic pipeline based on all of that, as long as you know what you think your projected top of funnel is going to look like. And then you basically add it up. I think what that allows folks to do, especially finance and CFOs, is they get forecasts. They're not really that accurate until you're within 30 days of the target number, because that's where you have the most information, and likely not much is going to change within that 30 days. But what CFOs are asking for, and finance folks, they want information that's going to tell them, are they going to hit not this month's forecast, but this quarter, next quarter, and the following. And the only way to do that is to really understand 6 months ahead, do we have enough? And are we executing as well as we should be to actually get to our target? If not, I have the time. I have those 3 months or 6 months to deploy different finite levers to close that revenue gap. Within 30 days, there's not much you can do.
Yeah. I think the 30 days, you start to look at more the bottoms up, right? You can start to look at the details, but to do the longer term planning, leveraging history, we're all living in the world of AI, right? So why not leverage the technology that's available to be able to do better predictive analysis around your forecast? Because it's not just customer data or account firmographics, but it's also rep behavior. Yeah, I think rep behavior, how they behave. We know that there's always going to be reps that are more proactive and more kind of everything is great. It's definitely going to close. And then the other reps who don't put the forecast in until paper has already been exchanged.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Forcing the behavior is big. Yes. Very cool. I think that covers it, Matt.
Yeah. So I know we're in the last few minutes, so we're going to wrap up. I did the last poll, and before I hit share, I'll ask you all the same question. So we went over the 5 mistakes, and I think you've got a slide, maybe like what do you think most people said of these 5 mistakes? What is their biggest challenge?
I think I'm going to pick number 3.
I was going to say either 2 or 3.
Yeah.
But all of these are really important. I think 4 is important too. I'll go with 2 since Clayton said 3.
It's the silos. And I think actually you could probably lump like 3 and 5 together. And yeah, that's where most folks feel they face their biggest challenges. I guess I'm not like, part of me is like not that surprised. I think on one hand, that's the whole point of revenue operations, is to drive alignment. But just because that's the point doesn't make it easy. Yeah. It's still hard to do, and it's fuzzy, and there's not like one right way to do it. I can see why a lot of folks would be struggling with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then almost an even spread across the other ones too.
Yeah.
Clayton,
So just in the last couple minutes, we'd love to hear from both Clayton, you, and then Rosalyn. We covered a lot in I think a bunch of different areas. We talked about the silo busting, the classic sales funnel, operational reports and data, having regular discussions on problems without any action plans on how to fix them. Closing remarks here. What are some things that you want to emphasize or maybe leave folks with today?
Yeah, I think from my perspective is data doesn't have to be perfect, but start to measure the moments that matter. Let's start instituting common methodology and a dictionary for how we measure the things. It'll get better over time, as Rosalind said, but you need a common source of truth to work from, and it needs to be across the entire customer journey. And then you start to think about, how do we align the teams to this cross-functional thinking that we're in it together? How do we align the goals and incentives to that as well? And then how do we use this information, I think, is really key. So not getting it perfect, just being willing to experiment and try new things, but being able to measure their impact so you can determine how and to what degree that they're working. And if you do that, I think you'll be in a much better position to focus on get to that customer centric model of go to market. You'll be making more data driven decisions. I think it'll put you on a path to that more efficient and sustainable growth.
yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you just said, Clayton. I guess the only thing I would add really is that I think getting started is the biggest blocker, right? I think a lot of the ops folks that I talk to are like, because it's all of these things are big, meaty, difficult initiatives. And a lot of times it's just no action, right? Because they are these big initiatives, but just taking bits and chunks of it and just getting started. Right? Like the driving alignment piece is even just looking at your operating cadence and start looking at those meetings and what opportunities you have to break down some of those silos in those meetings is a great way to just get started, right? Being curious around some of the reports that you're running, maybe taking a piece of the funnel, part of that customer journey, and just diving into that one piece and understanding what's working and what's not. These are things that you can spend an hour today or this week and just start to do. And then you'll start to see the benefits of those things. And it's like a snowball effect. You start doing some of that and it'll start to gain traction. And there's a lot of goodness that can come from those things.
Yeah, I'm a big bias for action person myself. Big believer that I think is Jeff Bezos that has the whole notion of one-way versus two-way doors. Nearly everything we do is a two-way door, right? Meaning if you go through, you can come back out on the other end. So I challenge everybody here today, right, with all these things that we just talked about, take that one big go-to-market challenge and do something about it by the end of the day. Do something to make progress towards fixing it, because the crew said here, you got to start, and sometimes that can be the hardest part, but bias for action and apply that framework to all these things in the future, right? Don't say, how can I get something done this quarter, this year, this month, right? Be like, how can I do something today, right? To help propel me forward toward my goal, and you'll wind up in a good spot. So with that, Rosalyn, Clayton, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the attendees, and I'll see y'all on the flip side. So take it easy, everybody.